the man in the legend himself. How you doing, Carl?
Yeah, that's right. I'm back.
Excellent. I want to show you a clip. This is Scott Benson. And I want to get your take on whether or not your point of view lines up with what Scott Benson is saying in regards to, let's say, the conversation between Trump and Xi Jinping. I know how much you love Scott Benson. You know how accurate he is as our Treasury Secretary. Let's hear what he has to say.
In the spring, this is a matter of national security. If President Trump had not had the IEEPA, which is an emergency tariff authority, back in the spring, he put IEEPA tariffs on China. And last week in, in Korea, the Chinese agreed to start working to bring down the precursors for fentanyl. If fentanyl is not a national emergency, what is? China on October 8th threatened to curtail rare earths to the entire world. President Trump threatened to put on 100% tariffs and protected our national security using the IEEPA power. And then finally, these big trade deficits we've had for years in economics, there's something called a tipping point. And we were at the tipping point. Fortunately, President Trump came in, he put on the tariffs, he is rebalancing global trade in favor of the U.S., and he has prevented an economic crisis.
So Trump clearly won the trade war. And if it wasn't for Trump passing those tariffs and going after China, we were at a tipping point. The end of all things was about to take place economically in the United States. But thankfully, our savior, Donald Trump, comes in and wrestles Xi Jinping to the ground and gets something out of it, in which case Scott Benson is effectively saying, thank God Donald Trump did whatever the hell Donald Trump did.
Right. So basically, China just agreed to buy soybeans again. And that's what China did. and the whole thing, he ignored the fact that it's Trump who started the whole thing, right? I mean, he said, because Trump had to do this back in the spring. Well, guess what? Now the effective tariff on China is now falling to the level of April. I mean, like right now we are seeing the effective tariff rate on China is approaching 20%, which is about the same as what the United States put on the rest of the world. And on the issue of fentanyl, China has always said to the United States it's perfectly willing to cooperate with U.S. law enforcement to trace where the fentanyl precursors are going. So first of all, the fentanyl precursors are actually a legitimate pharmaceutical ingredients. They're being produced in China because China produced the majority of the pharmaceutical supplies of the United States. What happened is you have drug cartels importing those chemical precursors and then synthesize them in labs in Mexico and United States in making into fentanyl. That is the issue. So before, China and US had an agreement where China will help to trace where those fentanyl precursor chemicals are being sent to make sure they don't end up in the wrong hands. But what happened was U.S. with Trump administration when start slapping tariffs on China and sanctions, and they're making some bogus claim about secret Chinese police departments on the soil of the United States. So China said, forget about it. We're not going to work with you. That during the Biden Xi Jinping meeting, actually China agreed to restart the cooperation between the law enforcement, and this continued into the Trump administration. So somehow that the Trump strong-armed Xi Jinping into this fentanyl trace program is just completely bogus because China always said they would work with the United States. The only time that cooperation was cut off was when U.S. first started to levy sanctions against China.
Mhm.
Now, and he mentioned October 8th, China placed more export control on rare earth. Now, what he did not say, this was in response to United States breaking the ceasefire. In September 29th, U.S. Commerce Department put out the BIS 50% rule, which greatly expanded the number of Chinese semiconductor companies on the blacklist. So originally, U.S. put 1,400 Chinese semiconductor company on the entity list, which would block them from doing any kind of business with either U.S. or other countries, U.S. vassal states that uses U.S. technology. So they expanded that list from 1,400 to 20,000. And it was a major escalation. And that actually led to the U.S. Government went to the government of Netherlands, told the Dutch, say, look, we are aware there's this Dutch company called Nesperia, which is 100% owned by a Chinese parent company, Wintech, and we're just letting you know we're going to put it on our entity list, and it's going to be blacklisted unless you do something. That led the Dutch government to seize the company from China in order to get around this issue. So that is what triggered China putting on more rare earth export control on U.S. By the way, China has only rolled back the October 9th export control on rare earth. They did not roll back the earlier export control on rare earth that dated from last year. So this is just a tit for tat thing. So U.S. agreed to roll back the September 29th BIS 50% rule. China agreed to roll back the October 9th export control on rare earth. But the previous rare earth export control is still on, which means some U.S. car manufacturers will get 6-month export license to import rare earth magnet. But good luck for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. U.S. military industrial complex is still going to have problems getting those rare earth because they're going to have to write an application to the Chinese Commerce Department, say, can we please have some rare earth for our F-35s and Patriot missiles and HIMARS so we can point them at China? So China still have the stranglehold. They can tighten their grip on the rare earth export control anytime. This time they flex the muscle just to let United States know that China will have options to strike back. Because previously China had been very careful not to escalate the trade war because they really do not want a trade war with the United States. But the U.S. administration took that as a sign of weakness. So they thought, we can push China around, no problem. They just keep on slapping more sanctions. And then Scott Bessent was caught with a Pikachu face when China extended the export control. But I mean, what did you expect?
That's a good question. I don't know what they expected. I mean, they seem to have went into this not necessarily thinking about the consequences of them doing it. I mean, Trump comes in, is like trade war. And he, for whatever reason, just expected everybody to say, oh my God, the imperial president is giving the trade war. We must bend the knee. I don't know what he expected. So is this a new norm going forward? That for all intents and purposes, China is looking at this as we're a peer. You're going to treat us as such. And if not, there are going to be consequences. And this is just the way it's going to operate moving into the future.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is why they didn't even bring up the whole discussion about the additional sanction on Russia on the discussion with Xi Jinping during the meeting, because they know what China was going to say. China's line has been very consistent. Who we purchase energy from is our business, none of your business. This is our sovereignty issue. And I just saw a one of the big pro-Ukrainian account on Twitter said, "Oh, China's been lying to the world. We have satellite intelligence showing that the LNG is being moved from one tanker to another China-bound tanker in South China Sea." But I'm like, wait a minute. Did China ever promise that they're going to join the sanction on Russia? No, China never said they would do that. So why would you be surprised? Why would you be surprised? How is China lying? China didn't say they're going to stop buying Russian LNG. So yeah, there's not much. It turns out, not only Trump didn't have any cards to play versus China, but all the cards are literally being made in China. And this is they have to. So we're gonna have to see how long this ceasefire will hold, because we had that first round of ceasefire when Scott Bessent had to chase the Chinese vice premier all the way to Geneva, then to London, and then only for them to break that truce in September. So we're gonna have to see how long. I was asking one of your prior guest, in fact, Warwick Powell, like why do you think the U.S. did this? They had to work really hard to work toward that first ceasefire. Why did they break it by escalating this trade war, by slapping the BIS 50% rule against Chinese semiconductor company? I think he had a good theory. He said, U.S. is like a multi-headed beast. All these U.S. Government bureaucracies, it's not very well-oiled machine. This might not even be like coordinated. They just like maybe Nutnick's Commerce Department just decided, okay, this is something they got to keep doing because of the inertia, and have been like without consider what kind of consequences that will be. And this goes for the whole U.S. trade war, because U.S. has been slapping tariff and thinking this will be a magic bullet. Everyone will bend the knee. They probably think China will act the way like the European leaders do. Call Trump daddy, but that's not going to work with China. And
I don't know why they would even think that. I mean, the European leaders apparently are refusing to go to a South American summit because they don't want to piss Trump off. Like, that's the level of submissiveness that, like, these guys are in an ass-out gimp suit. I don't know where they, I don't know, why would he think that China would be?
And the Europeans, we all know they don't even, it's not even secret. They all hate Trump's ass, but yet they have to perform this public humiliation ritual every day to pledge their loyalty. And this is, and Trump also publicly said he despised weak leaders. I mean, he's talking about the Europeans. It's just very cringe to watch this whole business going down. And I think the miscalculation of the Trump administration toward China was that China was trying really hard to not to escalate the trade war, because as I mentioned before, China just want to do business. U.S. is still their third largest trading partner. They don't want to, China is not out to strangle its best customer, the United States. China just want to keep on having a normal trade relationship. But when China practices strategic restraint, the United States took that as a sign of weakness. So, okay, they haven't done anything, you can just keep on pushing them. But, you can only do that for so long.
This puts me in the mind of, and I know I mentioned Three Body a lot, but there's a part in Three Body where Earth is working with this other alien group, the Lawrence, and Earth realized at some point that, hey, we can destroy the entirety of both planets because we can't beat them one-on-one. And so Earth used this as a way of saying, effectively, don't attack us, because if you attack us, we're just going to destroy both worlds. And what you ended up with was this situation of what they call a sword holder. And the sword holder was a person who would press the button to destroy both planets, if indeed one or the other planets attacked. The Tricelorans waited for like 60 years for the opportunity for it to change over in a way where they could effectively attack Earth. But they, like, Earth's point of view was, well, the Tricelorans aren't going to do it. They aren't going to attack us. They seem to be better people now. They seem to be okay. They were waiting for the very opportunity to go after the planet. And that puts me in mind of the U.S. The U.S. may be taking the stance of, okay, we found a balance. But China has to know that that balance is fickle. Like the moment that there's any weakness, the moment that there's any opportunity, anything that allows the U.S. to get some kind of leverage, they're going to jump on it. Just as a function of U.S. policy. It doesn't matter if it's Trump. It doesn't matter if it's Randall Democrat. They're going to jump on the opportunity to go after China. China has to know that, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Chinese leaders are not stupid, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, I would think the average Chinese leader had much higher the IQ than those bozos in Washington. And exactly. And so China is focused on developing its own strength, making China invincible. And that's what they did for the last 8 years after Trump first started slapping sanctions on China. They decided, okay, we got to make ourselves sanction proof, just to prepare for the worst case scenario of a decoupling from the United States. Well, while China has been doing that, what has the United States been doing? Nothing. I mean, then they decide to launch this tariff war without preparing for consequences. I mean, it's almost like the result is almost very predictable.
It's backfired. I'm curious about Venezuela. So the foreign minister for China, spokesman to the foreign minister, she came out and gave this statement effectively warning the United States. And I always hate the term warn, because warn often indicates a threat behind the warning, when I don't believe that China is going to get involved in any real sense. Russia seems to be sending military equipment into Venezuela in order to protect, effectively saying, we need to stand by our allies. Venezuela is an ally. So yes, we're going to dump military equipment into Venezuela. The U.S. has, at the very least, some sectors of the U.S. had talked about some kind of blockade to prevent China and Russia from sending anything to Venezuela. And I would imagine this is probably going to be related to oil or anything else coming out of Venezuela also. Will a blockade be something that, give me your take on that. How's China going to effectively deal with something like that? I mean,
a blockade is an act of war. A blockade is an act of war. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to board the Chinese oil tankers that will go to Venezuela to pick up oil? I mean, are you going to have U.S. Marines boarding a Chinese oil tankers? I mean, that is an act of war. So, right. I think right now what Trump administration is trying to do, I think they're still trying to do regime change on the cheap. So, which means they're gonna put more military forces around Venezuela to create this atmosphere of intimidation. So, like, oh, we're gonna do something. And I think they are putting their hope on by this very act of intimidation to force change inside Venezuela. Maybe have a color revolution type of, because there's plenty of gusanos working with United States inside Venezuela, including the so-called Nobel Peace winner. I mean, she's literally, she is publicly endorsing the military action against Venezuela right now. Nobel Peace Prize winner, literally advocating for war. I mean, we are living in 1984, folks. War is peace. But
you don't see China getting further involved. More so, China is just basically saying, this is a bad idea, don't do this. They're not giving a warning in the sense of they're getting involved in any particular fashion, in any particular real material way.
Well, I think China will continue economic assistance to Venezuela. That's the role that China traditionally plays. An example would be Syria, when Russia intervened in the Syrian civil war with military power. At that time, China came in with economic assistance. Right, that's how China and Russia works together. They don't get in each other's way. Russia is more willing to provide the hardware, the hard power assistance, and China can provide economic assistance, because right now China is the largest purchaser of Venezuelan oil at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how China is helping to prop up the Venezuelan economy. Now, if we're talking about blockade, that could get serious, because that is an act of war. I mean, like how is the United States? I don't think we're quite at that point yet. I think they're still going to, to carry out this acts of intimidation in hoping to inspire a regime change or a coup inside Venezuela. I mean, they might even. I can even see, even go as far as a bombing campaign, because that's how U.S. like to use its air power to like what they did in Libya, essentially, right? The NATO provided the air power, and then you have the rebels on the ground overthrowing Gaddafi. I think that's kind of the game they're going for right now. And if you think about why Maduro is distributing weapons to the public, I think it served two purposes. One is a warning to the United States that if they're thinking about occupation, it's going to be a very costly occupation. But the second one is they're arming the people to prevent a coup, to prevent an internal coup. I mean, that is probably more urgent at this point, because U.S. has tried many times to do a regime change in Venezuela. This time won't be the last, and so we're gonna have to see how that plays out.
Part of the rationale that they're going with, is we want to control the oil, and we don't like the fact that oil is going to China, and we don't like the relationship that Venezuela has with Russia. And so they're using both rationales as, because this has nothing to do with drugs, right? The drug thing is a thin fig leaf. Dick Cheney has just dropped dead. And it put me in mind of when the Queen died in the UK. It was like, well, end of an era. It's like it portends something. And the fact that Dick Cheney died.
Butcher of Baghdad died. That's what it is.
Yes,
he's
exactly.
He will be remembered as the Butcher of Baghdad. But the legacy must continue. The perpetual war must go on. So we just pivot. United States is pivot from one war to another war. So we have to pick on Venezuela, because with U.S. finally realized it can't take on Russia or China. So now you try to take what they perceive as a weaker party, weaker link. Because the military-industrial complex must be fed. All right, I was just watching a recent interview with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, talking about who is really running the United States. He's talking about, he has some good points. No matter what leaders who sits in the White House, the policy doesn't really change. It's always a man in suits who are calling the shots. It's just like when I remember when Putin asked to apply for NATO membership, Clinton first said, "Oh, okay, I'll consider it, but let me check with my people." And then later, Clinton told Putin, "Sorry, my people said no." Who are your people? Who is making the call here?
You're the president. Who are these people, right?
Yeah.
There's this great Twilight Zone episode where the guy, it's this guy, I guess it's a Fidel Castro-esque type person who they're trying to cast him as. And he overthrows the government because of injustice and poverty and crime and everything else. And when he gets in office, there's a guy with a suit coming and saying, "Hey, we need you to do the exact same policies or else you're going to die." The U.S. seems to be very similar in the sense of, this is what Putin said, right? That the moment that the president gets in office, there's a man with a suit and the suitcase says, "Hey, Your campaign was very nice. We appreciate that. But this is what we need you to do. Effectively, your policy is going to stay the same nonetheless. Do you think that what they're gaming for is a third world war? That they're looking across the globe, and there's this belief that we are in a low-level third world war as it is, meaning Russia is literally in the middle of a fight with Ukraine. 1 million Ukrainians have died. This is not a minor war. Europe seems to be gearing up for this idea of getting further involved into the conflict. The U.S., sitting in the background, seems to be maneuvering, at the very least, still instigating itself into the European affairs in regards to the war with Russia. And now the U.S. has decided, okay, well, we don't like the fact that Russia and China are in our backyard, which, if you're in the middle of a larger war with Venezuela, if indeed Russia has missile systems in Venezuela, would be an issue for the United States in the context of that war. Meaning you have weapon systems that can hit the United States in a very short period of time. Do you think that that has anything to do with this provocative action against Venezuela?
Jamar, we don't have to look that far. We can just look to the Cold War. The Cold War wasn't really cold. The Cold War was only cold between the two superpowers. Cold War was very hot in a lot of the third world countries, where the proxy war is being fought. The Cold War wasn't cold in Korea. It wasn't cold in Vietnam. It wasn't cold in Africa. So what United States right now is they're restarting the Cold War. They're doing the Cold War 2.0. So they're playing with the same playbook. And so what the ultimate goal is still to ensure the U.S. primacy. Even right now they recognize, maybe we can't contain China at the moment, but they're trying to consolidate the U.S. power in the West Hemisphere in order to be able to challenge China and Russia later. So this is the goal. They're trying to this is why they're really hypersensitive about Chinese and Russian influence in Latin America, because they see, we gotta implement the neo-Monroe's doctrine here to keep these power out, to keep this whole American continent, North and South, under the thumbs of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's such a good point. Because in the old days, it was like, keep the Europeans out. And now it's keep the Chinese and the Russians out. So now Monroe Doctrine 2.0 with another policy thing. Carl, man, thank you for this. Carl, the time frame here is a little bit weird. So it's like when I started the show, I started at 5:45 as opposed to 5 o'clock, which is why when I sent the message, it was like, I thought you were 15 minutes behind. Oh, you weren't 15 minutes behind. You were perfectly on time. This was me who's off kilter in regards to this clock. Thank you for joining me, man. I always appreciate you joining me. Always appreciate it. The audience loves you. I always love it when you come on the show. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you, Jamar. Anytime.
And just for the audience, Carl Jha, host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk, the letter N. And you can subscribe and support him on Patreon at patreon.com/silk and steel. Check him out. He has great content. Carl is